Welcome Team Rhino and happy Cinco de Rhino. We have a full day of events planned for you today, including talks, games, watch parties, and more. Today, we are raising essential emergency funding for the people and organizations who are protecting rhinos during the crisis. Funds will be used to support salaries and health and safety needs for the dedicated men and women who continue to ensure that rhinos and other endangered species will survive. You can give today at our website, rhinos.org, or on our Facebook page. My next two guests can really show you how that donation will make a huge impact. I had the opportunity to catch up with Elise Serfontein of StopRhinoPoaching.com and Simon Naylor, Conservation Manager at Phinda Private Game Reserve in South Africa. Live broadcasts from where Elise lives in South Africa can be a little tricky with the connection, so we previously taped this interview that I will play for you now. Hi, Elise and Simon, and thank you for joining me. Elise, can you... Oh, thank you, Elise. Elise, can you tell me a little bit about Stop Rhino Poaching?
So StopRhinoPoaching.com was formed back in 2010 as a response to the escalation of rhino poaching in South Africa. So this year we're actually 10 years old. And we're basically actively involved in the fight against rhino poaching with a national footprint for strategic funding of security initiatives and ranger support on the front lines. So our role is very much security orientated, and we help preserve to safeguard the ranger and their rhinos' lives.
And what are some of the regular programs that Stop Rhino Poaching offers?
So over the years, we've basically fine-tuned a number of focus areas. And those focus areas have been put together on a lot of experience of the guys in the bush looking at lessons learned. You know, the absolute basics they need to operate, so things like equipment, ranger kit, tactical trauma packs, camera traps, various advanced technologies. We look at specialized training. So we've started rolling out, and we were with Simon just before lockdown down at Phinda, basic legal training for rangers and their supervisors, advanced ranger training, the tactical first aid training, close quarter combat, that type of stuff. We have been putting in support for investigators and security stakeholders. A little bit of research, and then another area that's been very important for us is getting the different reserve managers and security stakeholders together, encouraging information sharing, connecting various people, and just building those networks, because at the end of the day, it's going to take everybody talking to each other just to work out what are the lessons learned, what are the best practices. So that's been strategic stakeholder relationships has been very important for us. And then also very much involved, you know, with the RF, ranger wellness programs. So specifically for rangers that are involved in combat situations and high stress situations that do impact on one's psychological wellness. The RF has been very important for us in helping to fund specialized a specialized psychologist, which is then available for those rangers to talk to. So yeah, that's basically kind of in a nutshell what we do look at. That does change from time to time, but those are our main focus areas.
And can you tell us a little bit about the Rhino Dogs program?
Oh yes, with pleasure. Another project that RF has just been instrumental in. We've been involved with Rhino Dogs, I think since 2012. We've so far deployed about, I think it's now 33 dogs around the country, so around South Africa and into Swaziland, now called Eswatini. Over the years, we've grown a very strong relationship with a dog trainer called Johan van Straten. He's currently with the South African Wildlife College. His knowledge and expertise is exceptional, and he's a genuinely really nice guy. So he does all of the training of our dogs. What we'll do is we'll have a look at what the requirement is from the reserve, and then we'll try and match that requirement with the type of dog breed that they need. The different applications of the dogs for anti-poaching will be from human tracking, apprehension, which is the bitey part at the end, endangered species detection, so that could be across rhino horn, ivory, pangolin, and a couple of other species as well. And then also ammunitions and weapons detection, sniffing out weapons, bullets, casings, etc. In different scenarios. So a reserve might need a single discipline dog. So an example of that would be the RF's Dozer, who's a German Shepherd Cross Malinois. And he's a detection dog and specializes in detection. And then whenever we can, we try and combine different disciplines. So we'll have a human tracker dog that can also do the bite work and that can also do the detection work. So it depends very much on the ability of the dog. So for example, there we've got Larry, who's actually Dozer's brother. And the RF have been amazing. They've come in and they've helped support Larry's training. So when we first deployed him, he was a human tracker dog and an apprehension dog, but he showed great potential to be a detection dog. So he's currently up at the Wildlife College with Johan now, busy doing his detection training, and he's been absolutely brilliant at both endangered species and ammunitions. So there's a really good example of an all-rounder in one dog, where you can then obviously save on funding because dogs are expensive, and you can teach one dog multiple applications and multiple uses. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Simon.
Hi, Chris.
Simon's wonderful. He's sitting outside on a beautiful sunny day in South Africa as the sun is going down. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi. Yeah, so I'm the conservation manager here at Phinda Private Game Reserve, which is a private reserve in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. We're on the sort of northeastern side of South Africa, in an area which many people sort of know as Zululand. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of the home of rhinos, white rhinos. The southern white rhino was saved here by Dr. Ian Player in the 60s. Yeah, as the conservation manager, I'm sort of responsible for everything that's related to, I guess, the conservation of wildlife, you know, and that's includes security, you know, all the sort of wildlife management, the land management, and I'm very involved in the community work that takes place here. We're very involved, and we have a very long-standing relationship with some of our surrounding communities. So that's also a responsibility of mine.
Great. Can you tell me, how is COVID-19 impacting reserves in South Africa, particularly your reserve?
Yeah, look, it's had a huge impact, and obviously very sudden. You know, most private reserves in South Africa, you know, are tourism orientated. You know, there are, you know, hunting reserves that do primarily hunting, but some of the, you know, most of the larger sort of private reserves like ourselves, you know, we're reliant almost solely on revenue from tourism. We have lodges, quite a number of lodges on the reserve, and obviously COVID-19, you know, there was obviously a very rapid elimination of tourism. You know, with all the travel bans, you know, our market is primarily international, and so currently now our lodges are sitting empty and closed, you know, with the South African response was very swift, and you know, the government instituted into a sort of a very stringent, tight lockdown. So a lot of our staff have gone home, and obviously there's a few essential staff on the reserve to take care of the infrastructure, and obviously, you know, wildlife need to be taken care of. Conservation and specifically security and anti-poaching has been fortunately deemed an essential service. So those that are involved in conservation, wildlife management, and security continue to work. So, but yeah, the impact has been massive financially. I think you know, the wildlife sort of security side of it is still, you know, I think we're still to see the impacts there as well.
And patrols are still in effect?
Yes, I think, well, I can speak on behalf of Phinda, and I think most other reserves. Patrols are still happening. We have a full security complement. I think most reserves, if not all reserves, are, you know, we're expecting an increase in you know, poaching. I don't think it's been seen everywhere. I think it's increased in some places, in others it hasn't. Here on Phinda, we haven't seen an increase. But yeah, we have a full staff complement that are out every day patrolling and protecting wildlife. And then obviously from the sort of wildlife management side, we've got a skeleton staff that are taking care of any sort of wildlife management, research monitoring. You know, if we've got injured animals, we need to take care of. So yeah, for us, you know, work carries on, and we continue working.
Elise, is there a risk of increased poaching activities at this time in South Africa?
I think the threat is always there. It depends very much on how the syndicates are going to adjust to our lockdown regulations. And then maybe to differentiate between rhino poaching and then the meat poaching side, which we've been really worried about. On a national scale, rhino poaching is down in South Africa, which took us by surprise. As Sai said, you know, there was a very swift reaction from government to putting the lockdown regulations in place. So far we've been very fortunate. The lockdown has made it very difficult for poaching groups to move around. And it's risky for them to move around because we've had an increased police and military presence on our roads. With the international borders that have been closed, and obviously that'll impact on the trafficking routes. So I think there are a lot of things that are busy playing out at the moment that we maybe don't quite understand yet. For the last 5 weeks or so, the reduction in rhino poaching has been a very welcome relief for everyone on the reserves. Of course, you still worry day and night. However, the worrying time is coming now as government starts lifting our restrictions gradually. As more and more people are allowed to move, poachers are going to be wanting to make money. And there's going to be increased risk to the reserves. Not only rangers potentially falling ill and entire teams being quarantined, etc., but also we're now going back, you know, slowly but surely out of lockdown into very severe financial restriction, you know, concerns, and where the reality is that a number of reserves are going to have instituted a lot of jobs are being lost, and then, you know, where does that leave them with their security? So at the moment, the most important thing we can be doing really is looking to help support reserves to try and safeguard the jobs of the conservation staff in their areas.
And Simon, you mentioned you do a lot of community work around Phinda. Can you describe some of those programs?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we have a foundation called the Africa Foundation that focuses on, you know, sort of education, small business, health primarily. So, I mean, we support various educational institutions, schools, you know, the building of classrooms, clinics. We supply equipment to those classrooms and clinics. We're busy with a program in one of our communities. We're actually busy building a new high school. You know, there's such a demand for, you know, the number of children, you know, have outgrown the current existing high school. So, yeah, and then, you know, I think the focus has been now on trying to supply, you know, because of the lockdown, is just to try and supply, you know, medical supplies to the clinics that are here. You know, we've got a number of feeding schemes, especially at orphanages and schools. Obviously, schools are closed, but some of these feeding schemes are still happening. So, you know, the organization and the staff are trying to keep some of those feeding schemes going. You know, there's, you know, Elise has highlighted the fact that, people's livelihoods have really been impacted by this, this pandemic and the resulting, economic fallout. So I think that's been the focus now, is medical supplies and food. I mean, those are the two most critical needs in the communities right now. And so that's what we've been focusing on, just to try and reduce or limit the impact of the virus, here around us.
And Elise, you mentioned some of the impacts on rangers, that entire teams could be quarantined, and that could really put stress on the system. What are some of the other needs that rangers might have during this time?
I think the reserves have been really good at providing PPE to their teams. Definitely the reserves that we've been speaking to find out what they need. We have been able to supply masks, gloves, sanitizer, etc. to some reserves, but a lot of them had already put that in place. I think the biggest concern at the moment that I've seen is definitely job security. The emotional impact, where you have worked with rangers for so many years, you've literally walked side by side into some horrendous situations. These are people who've got your back, you've got their backs. For reserves that have walked a long way with their staff and spent a lot of time and effort in upskilling them, training them, and they know they can rely on them. They're now having to look those men and women in the eye and say to them, we don't know if we've got enough funding to keep you here. They know the impact of that for their rangers and their conservation staff, and what it means to the families. That job security in knowing that you can keep your security teams in place, you can keep your conservation staff in place, your staff can afford to keep feeding their families. I think that's what's playing the biggest role in the worry that's going on around at the moment, is how do we keep our staff and how do we make sure that they're okay through this? Because without the staff, we're sitting with severe consequences for the rhinos that we've all been working so hard to protect for so many years.
So IRF has established the Reserve Relief Fund, and it's to provide emergency funding to those rangers. How can a donation today have an impact now and into the future?
As I said, we've all given so much of our effort and our hearts to trying to conserve rhinos over the years, and I think that given the challenges, we've all as a huge collaboration done so well. We've been given a curveball that none of us were expecting. We could never have imagined what was coming, and I think that even though everybody in the whole world has been so impacted by this, the fact that we are all bound together by our love of rhinos, and for everybody who's watching this, you're watching it because you love rhinos. A donation today means that you will be helping a recipient reserve do the very best they can with that funding to secure whatever needs they've got in their reserve. And I mean, that's one thing that the IRF has just always been fantastic about. They are very careful in who they support. All the qualifying criteria need to be there. And that all means that, as I said, where your funding is going is where it's going to make the biggest difference. And if we can keep those teams on the ground, it's going to make a difference to rhinos into the future.
And Simon, what are some of the ways people could mitigate the loss of tourism dollars for reserves like Phinda?
Well, I mean, tourism dollars fund pretty much everything on these private reserves. A recent survey by the Private Rhino Owners Association in conjunction with SADC and WWF has shown that now almost more than 50% of rhinos in South Africa are now on private reserves, and obviously private reserves are private. They businesses in some form or shape or another, you know, their revenue is, as I mentioned, you primarily from tourism. Some reserves, you know, receive a little bit of government grants through job creation programs, and then obviously many now are very reliant on NGO funding. So I think, you know, generally, you know, with tourism completely gone, sources of revenue to fund, you know, these reserves have just disappeared overnight, and people are scrambling. And so, you know, either you find a, you know, an alternative source of revenue, which is very, very difficult in these trying times, or, you know, you've got to cut your costs, you know. And so I think, you know, for reserves like Phinda, you know, if we can get emergency funding to bridge this sort of crisis until our sort of tourism revenue comes back, which, I mean, none of us know when that's going to be, you know, but we sort of looking in, you know, it could be 12 months. We really need another source of revenue or income just to sustain or try and sustain what we have. I mean, the goal is to ensure that your risk is, you know, your risk reward is kept, and your high standards of management and security is kept as high as possible. But it's very, very challenging. So, you know, things like that are linked to tourism. I mean, as I said, everything's linked to tourism, but, you know, your high cost of security, you know, to try and limit the you know, for example, retrenchments or job losses that are potentially going to happen now. Things like dehorning, you know, these are crucial things which often rely on tourism, that have very high impact in securing, for example, rhinos, and so equipment for field rangers, you know, uniforms, but, you know, those are sort of things that are actually have become secondary. You know, just job security, you know, bridging or supplementing, you know, job cuts, etc., like that. Things like dehorning, yeah, as I've mentioned. So, yeah, support for communities, you know, keeping people with medical supplies and feeding. So people's basic needs now are crucial in these times. So that's where I think reserves, certainly private reserves, can benefit and ensure, I guess, at the end of the day, the safety of, you know, we're talking about 50% of rhinos left in the world, or in South Africa. So that's crucial.
And are there some other ways that people could get involved as well?
Well, I think awareness, again, always awareness and education is key. These are the times where, you know, we need to make, there's so much other news in the world, and sort of people forget about, you know, rhinos and wildlife, you know, because there's such other worthy news items. That's the one thing. And then I think just supporting, you know, NGOs, credible NGOs, and supporting the reserves on the ground. You know, NGOs like yourselves have been incredible support over the years, and I think that's, yeah, that's what people can do is support NGOs like yourselves that support the you know, the reserves on the ground.
Thank you. Elise, are there some other ways people could get involved?
I think that the reality is that it takes funding to do what needs to be done. At the moment, for every $1, we can do 18 times more here in South Africa. I think literally our rand has crashed. So there's a very good exchange rate going at the moment. Funding aside, the IRF has got some amazing zoo partners. So for people who can't, you know, help to support this initiative, please support your local zoos initiatives. Participate in their programs, very important. Learn more about rhinos, learn to love rhinos even more if that's possible. Participate in IRF celebrations. We all learn from the content that you guys are putting out, so it's fantastic. And then I think just something that I always little message I try and get across is that on social media platforms, be supportive of our rangers. Be supportive of the success stories. Be mindful of what you say. It's always really difficult going to some reserves and the rangers' morale is really low because there might be a story that's come out about internal corruption or rangers being arrested, etc. It hurts them terribly. The betrayal of that, but then also seeing quite harsh criticism, and painting everybody with the same brush, especially when they're trying so hard. So be mindful on social media, please. It's really important for the teams out there.
That's a great suggestion and idea. Yeah, go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, can I just add, it probably, I'm sure a lot of your viewers watching and listening perhaps had intentions of traveling to Africa maybe in the future, or had even, we've had a lot of, bookings, that have either been deferred, and that I think that's where also people can really help and support is maybe, is not cancel their bookings, is defer them and come later, because, every sort of tourist now, it's is crucial and vital to the the normality, or is sort of getting back these reserves and lodges and industry back up to speed. So I think that's also crucial. Is if you were traveling, just defer and come again, postpone. But don't cancel, please, we want you to travel when this thing is normalized, if it ever will. And that will go a long way to supporting and helping the reserves and the staff on the reserves. That's another way that people can really help.
Excellent. Postpone, don't cancel your trip. That way reserves will get up to speed as quick as possible after this pandemic.
Yeah.
Elise, what gives you hope for the future of Africa's rhinos?
I think the goodwill across the board, from the ranger teams on the ground to donors all over the world, to people like yourselves who've become so important in our lives, for all the ugliness that we've seen and what's happening to rhinos and the scary part of all of this with the organized crime syndicates and how they keep evolving. On the opposite side of that, there is such good in people. And over the years, we've seen the most amazing projects. We've seen the most amazing impact. We know that we are making a difference. Sometimes one looks at the statistics and you might not really feel it, but all of this is going in the right direction. We've got to keep trying and we've got to keep working at it. And I promise you we couldn't do it without the IRF. So thank you so much to all of you for all of your efforts as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank my guests today, Elise and Simon. Thank you so much for the work that you do on the ground in South Africa. It's our pleasure to work with you. And both of you, if you could do us a favor on behalf of Team Rhino, please extend our appreciation and thanks to all of the rangers that are working hard to protect rhinos. To learn more about programs in Africa, please visit IRF's website at rhinos.org. We'll be back here in Cinco de Rhino at 1 p.m. Eastern. We have a special live reading of One Special Rhino, the story of Ndatu. You won't want to miss it, and it's great for kids as well. Tune in all day as we celebrate Cinco de Rhino. There's still time to put together your own Cinco de Rhino virtual happy hour. The toolkit is at rhinos.org. Gather some friends for a virtual party and raise some needed funds for rhino protection. You can make donations at rhinos.org or on our Facebook page as well. Thank you, and we'll see you in a couple of hours as our Cinco de Rhino fun continues.